A very good afternoon in sunny Bulawayo, and it's been a fantastic 3 days so far. Well, 2 days.
Yeah, 2 days.
Yeah. We still have another day to go, but I'm enjoying my time. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Producer, for getting us out here in Bulawayo. It's fantastic.
Well,
I mean, we're staying in a very nice place. Would you like to tell us a little bit more? Who found this place? Was it Ranga or was it Truvara?
It was Ranga.
Okay, so Ranga, please tell us a little bit about this place.
Yeah. And I generally don't rate his taste, but he found a gem.
Yeah.
So we are here at Fairbridge Guest House in Hillside. And as you can see, it's a very lovely place. I think it's about 9-10 rooms. Very modern rooms. Very practical, and the environment, I mean, you can pretty much spend the whole day here.
Yeah.
Just sitting and,
The
relaxing.
stuff is hospitable.
Yes, yeah. And look, one fateful day, came here for business, went to our usual place. They didn't have availability. They said, you know what, guys, you should go check out this place called Fairbridge. And I've been a Fairbridge person since then. And I'm glad every person that I've referred here, I have actually liked it.
Well, Fairbridge, you actually have a fan in me. Would you like to say something about it?
No, it's a fantastic place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I quite like it. I'd recommend it to anybody who needs to spend a bit of time in Bulawayo.
True, I agree. The show is actually sponsored again by Natural Joy. Thank you very much, Derrybot, for doing this. And I'm going to have the passion coconut. That's precisely what everyone is having, right?
Yeah, it
sure.
looks like that's
Okay.
what we're all having.
So maybe to the audience, the reason why you're watching this on a Monday is because this is a special edition, primarily because late evening on Friday, we had an MPS statement that was signed by the Reserve Bank Governor, John Mushayawanu, and there were a number of things. And I think since then, the entire Zimbabwe and the diaspora has gone crazy. And a lot of you have been asking for us to actually just go do a deep dive and actually understand what is happening. So maybe to just kick off and to start off, and there's something that I think is critical that we just need to be aware of. It's in the first news. So I'll go with the rumor and the rhetoric and what was happening. Early Friday afternoon, the first news we got was that the exchange rate had moved. And a lot of people went on the Reserve Bank website, and indeed the exchange rate had moved, and it had
Apparently it
moved.
crashed for some time, right? Because so many people were checking it out.
Yeah. And the exchange rate had moved from 14 to 25. But subsequent to that, we then got a statement. And a keen observer would have noticed that the statement actually doesn't have any mention of the rate, or the rate is actually moving from 14 to 25. So in most regards, there's a lot of speculation because the central bank itself or the governor has not pronounced on the rate. The MPS has actually not pronounced on the rate, but people are going with the rhetoric. And yes, whether it's state media and everywhere, people are talking about it. And yes, on the website, it has moved. But what I want you guys to first discuss and maybe, read into it, or should we read into it? What does it mean that the MPS did not speak to the exchange rate, but we know that the exchange rate has actually moved? What do you make of it?
So they didn't want to give it so much attention and focus. They were considering other. I think the last 3 weeks, what we saw was there was a lot of chatter around the exchange rate, and obviously we know it is the reason why we have had all these measures taken. So the other kind of measures, whether around the policy rate, the structural reserve, and other things, they are basically, I don't think they rank highly relative to the importance of the exchange rate itself. But I think from the viewpoint of the policymakers, they didn't want to make it the main thing,
And yet it is the main
and
thing.
yet it is the main thing. I don't think the Monetary Policy Committee, when they sat down the biggest issue on the agenda was around where the policy rate has to be and the need to adjust the statutory reserve. All those adjustments were done to try to still support an exchange rate that they had in mind. But this was significant. For me, I actually saw it on a WhatsApp chat that just came. I think it was written like the exchange rate has been moved from 14 to 25. And that's all the news that people wanted. One would have expected that maybe there was some commentary behind that. But I'm sure that's what we're going to discuss in detail.
Yeah, maybe Rufaro, you can speak to that, because I want us to zero in on that. What does it mean? Because the MPS does not pronounce the exchange rate, but we find the exchange rate on the website, and we know that it has moved. And it also, we don't know what the framing is. Has it moved because now we have a free exchange rate, there's an interbank market, or it has moved and it's just a one straightforward devaluation? Would you like to speculate, because that's what we're left to do?
Yeah, look, I think sadly the central bank doesn't have a lot of credibility at this point. The movement in the exchange rate, what it speaks to is the fact that the exchange rate was managed and controlled by the central bank and not a free market exchange rate, because it was basically trading within a very narrow range from the 5th of April this year until literally Friday, when it was changed to 25, which strikes me as an arbitrary number. It doesn't.
Of course it is.
It's not like you had a bunch of market participants sit around a room and haggle out a rate, right? So somebody in an ivory tower decided 25 is a good number, let's do 25. And the real rate is actually north of 30. And I think we also saw last week the retailers come out and speak to their challenges in terms of replacing the inventory. And I think we were approaching a place where we would start to see empty shelves, the way the exchange rate was being enforced. So I think, the central bank is on the back foot here. They're responding to dynamics on the ground, that are hurting the retailers. But they're behind the curve.
But why do you think the MPS did not address the exchange rate issue?
So sadly, I'm at a place where when I look at statements from the Reserve Bank, when I read things like the MPS, I take it not with a pinch of salt, but with a bucket of salt. Because
so then, what does it mean if it's actually not in the
because
MPS?
The Reserve Bank has made all these statements, and if you take them at face value, it's fantastic. They're doing the right thing. But if you actually look at the reality on the ground and what's happening, it's there's a huge gap there. So
let me decode what you're trying to say, because I want it to be in very simple language, and let me sort of try and understand what you're trying to say, and then throw it back to you. What you're saying is actually the truth of the matter is there's a disconnect between the rhetoric and what they actually do.
Absolutely.
And the people who changed the rate from 14 to 25 didn't care what the rhetoric was.
Yep.
Okay, fantastic.
It's just a week or two ago, we had the same institution say that they injected $64 million into the market at about 14, and then now we're at 25, right? So we just so they basically just eviscerated I haven't done the math, but $25 million. And this is the same institution that's been very sanctimonious about people behaving badly, enforcing very heavy-handed policing of trades above 14, and then overnight the rate goes from 14 to 25. It's remarkable.
Yeah, it's still mind-boggling. So what we're going to do is, let's not discuss the MPS for now. let's actually discuss the exchange rate. And unfortunately, we don't have a framework in which we can actually look at and say, oh, I think now they've just devalued and the new fixed rate is 25, or now it's actually an interbank. It's a free exchange, free market rate, or are we back with the auction? We actually are not so sure, but we're left to speculate again. So Ranga, could you speculate what this means? Is this just a new level of 25, or does this mean that we'll have a vibrant interbank market?
The central bank or the monetary authorities basically had their hand forced. It was not planned. What we saw in the past few weeks, where retailers and other players, economic agents, were, publicly saying or telling us that the exchange rate, the level where it was hurting them. I think obviously that forced them into some action. And
So
that
the threat of empty shelves.
the threat of empty shelf, but also the fact that the retailers actually spoke quite loudly. They vocalized their concerns, and these concerns were pretty much what the public had as well. So obviously it must have created a problem within the monetary authorities, and they just had to step in. So there's no formula to that number, and there is no predictability even to, okay, are we expecting willing buyer, willing seller? Is it driven by willing buyer, willing seller, or is it just some number that is plucked out of thin air? I think they just looked at transaction on the power market and then, okay, what's a nice number? The rate is now above 30, maybe let's try 25, because that's where the transactions are. And when you look at the paper from the retailers, I think 25 was more like the average, but somewhere up there around 30.
33.
Yeah, 33, and others were down around 20, 21. I know recently on some of the services that we acquired as part of the conference that we had as IPAS, the rate was around 22. So they had to do that. And it's a disappointment because now there was no reference to the structured currency, the fact that it was backed by these precious commodidities.
Gold is at an all-time high, by the way.
Yes. And
but the ZiG is devaluing.
Yes.
Yet it's backed by, initially a third of the backing was actually gold.
So when they announced the ZiG for the first time and that rate of 13, there was some story. Obviously, you would choose to believe it or otherwise, but there was some narrative that, okay, this is how we have come up with this number, and because we have got this much of these commodities backing this currency, so one would have expected some similar sort of narrative to accompany the number and say, you know what, the reason for this adjustment is because we've seen this and that, so that people can predict what's likely to happen. But right now, what we have is the number that will maybe hold for a few weeks before, again, the gap between it and the power market will be so huge that it will create problems for business and arbitrage opportunities.
I'm going to say the quiet part out loud, right? Why would a structured currency where every unit of ZiG is backed by US dollars and gold devalue 44%, right? Under what set of circumstances would that ever happen? And the answer is simple: printing. Which, when the structured currency was announced, there was a very emphatic statement from the central bank that there would be no printing. And yet, here we are.
So what do you think happened? Why is there printing? If the governor had insisted that there won't be any printing, and Treasury, Mthuli, had also insisted that they were not going to run a deficit. But by midterm, what we know is that Mthuli came out and there was a deficit of about 2.3 billion ZiG, which was equivalent at that time of around 13% of our GDP.
So why I can't speak to, but what I can
Not of GDP, but of revenue.
But what I can speak to as an analyst is just the historical data, right? And for the longest time, our government and our central bank have made forecasts and made statements about fiscal discipline, and on the ground, they have, behaved differently. They have not been disciplined. They have not lived within their means. They have resorted to printing. We have a very long, well-documented history of this. Throughout Governor Gono's tenure, he insisted that.
But John Mshawan had shown that he's different. He actually came on the show, well, not on the show, but he came on the scene with the promise of being different, that he was going to move away from fiat currency to a structured currency. So there was an attitude or a rhetoric of difference.
Yes, I was initially quite optimistic. I thought, if the governor actually follows through on the statements that he's making, ZiG would succeed. And I remember at the time, you and Rango were actually quite skeptical. You said, well, you know what? Yes, the man has impeccable credentials from the private sector, but the government is the government. And
it's much larger than an individual.
Yes, and they just do things in a certain way. And it doesn't matter, who is appointed. It's just, change is just not possible. And sadly, you guys turned out to be correct. We've seen the central bank print since announcing a currency that is on paper structured, but in reality, it is not structured.
So Ranga, looking into your crystal ball, what do you think is going to happen for the rest of the year? Because I think that the audience, business, individuals, people in the diaspora would want to know, given what we know of our government, given what we now know of John Mshabanyu, what do you speculate is going to happen in the next 6 months, primarily with regards to our currency?
I expect the printing to continue. Because I'm not seeing efforts on the ground to try and rein in on expenses. So the insatiable appetite for spending remains there. Probably you'd say some of the spending is probably necessary if you look at it maybe from the infrastructure, maybe the roads that we've seen. But I think that's actually not the best way of going about doing your infrastructure as well. So there must be some other mechanism where you should be able to raise capital for this project to be done. So the printing is going to continue, and in fact is going to get worse as we get into the new farming season. So because with the drought, I'm expecting to see a bigger number being allocated to input schemes or to some sort of support. At the same time, importation of grain, so that people could have something to eat for food security reasons, and etc. And how is that going to be funded? It's not like the revenue base is increasing. It's not like Zimra is collecting more. And in fact, because they're insisting on maybe 50% of collections being Zim dollars or in ZiG, or Zim dollar, ZiG, whatever.
You can't tell the difference
You can't tell the difference anymore.
Oh, it's a local currency.
Yeah, it's a local currency. So it means increasingly the value of the revenue that the fiscal is going to collect is only going to shrink. Yet the costs remain very, hardened. So how are they going to plug that gap? They'll have to print, and I guess when you look at all these governors that have come and gone, I think the Zim economic management structure is well beyond individuals. So I wouldn't falter them as this is their thinking, because some of them they are people that we know, and they're right.
So you're actually alleging that this could potentially be beyond John Musharraf. It's much bigger than him as an individual.
It's much bigger. It's much bigger than him. I don't think it's knowing him as I do. I don't think he would have. What is happening right now is something that someone would ordinarily pursue, knowing the consequences that we're going to befall us. So things are only gonna get worse for the Muslim dollar, and it's I'm actually surprised that at a time when this is also happening at a time when there's a lot of talk about de-dollarization. So there's a thinking that indeed we could actually anchor the whole economy on a currency that is failing, even at this stage. So it's come the end of the year, we're going to see more frequent adjustment of the exchange rate and more calls for that to happen. Otherwise, the shelves are going to be empty, and the business players are going to be more vocal.
Yeah. So, Rufaro, there's something that was hilarious that I saw on X. So, one guy asked the question, and he sort of says, does this mean that ZiG is no longer gold backed? And then a very cheeky fella replies, and he says, the G is silent. But let's speak to that. I mean, that's hilarious, but let's speak to that. Does it mean that this was never a structured currency and this was actually just fiat currency in name and in deed, but they built this song and dance around structured currency? What does this tell us?
You know that saying, if it walks like a duck
and quacks
and quacks like a duck, So ZiG on paper is a structured currency, but in reality, it's behaved like a fiat currency. And
so it will be judged as a fiat currency.
It was never convertible into US dollars from day one. People struggled to. People who had ZiG who needed to pay hard currency invoices struggled to actually get their hands on hard currency. And if it's a structured currency, it should be fully fungible, freely fungible. You should always be able to convert it into US dollars. I mean, and one of the things that the governor emphasized when the ZiG was announced was that there's only $80 million US dollars worth of ZiG in issue. There's 185 million at the time of issue. That is, there was 185 million hard currency US dollars backing it, and another $100 million of gold, right? And they would not issue any units of ZiG that were not backed by either gold or US dollars. And if that was actually, in fact, the case, then there would be no devaluation. In fact, we would expect ZiG to strengthen because gold is at an all-time high.
Very true. Okay, so before I get into the MPS statement, and this is for you, Ranga, because I think it's something that you raised in a number of forums, and it had to do with the backlog. So there's about $90 million US dollars of the auction backlog from John the First auction, and these importers were now being given NNCDs, which were ZiG denominated, and they had an exchange. They had an interest rate, but I think about 7, a nominal interest rate, really, when you think about it. And then you also had export surrender, 25% export surrender. These are exporters who were yet to receive their ZiG, and this was now again in an instrument, an NNCD instrument, and this was a year. So with the auction backlog, that's 2 years. It became a 2-year paper. And with exporters, it was a 1-year-old paper. These people have made huge losses from this depreciation. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, so these are huge losses, and especially when you're considering that these are businesses we're not enjoying huge margins anyway because of the economic environment in which we're working. Maybe all the cost within their value chain, and so you're looking at electricity. Most businesses are having to augment their power needs with diesel powered generators. Others are resorting to solar and etc. And all generally the cost build up for most businesses has been very high. So margins were already thin, and then you've got 25% of your foreign currency being converted at a rate which for the longest time will be half the rate that's obtaining on the
real world,
on the power market and all. So it's really something that we have seen over the years. If you go into history, last 20, 30 years, we've got stories of gold miners who for the longest time were not the gold receipts were converted into local currency, and they didn't get full value, and some businesses actually closed shop as a result of that.
These are real consequences. So maybe Rufaro, you can speak to some of the biggest losers of the exchange rate moving and the biggest winners.
Yeah, so when Ranga was talking, it actually reminded me of something else that happened a couple of weeks ago. Is people who were owed money in the auction, they got local currency.
That's what we were talking about.
Instruments, and
that are 2 years. It's dated 2 years.
Yeah. They no, not 2 years. Some of the paper is actually matures in 2027.
Oh, you mean legacy debt? So not just
the auction from the auction. So
no, the auction. Yeah. It's NNC's.
No. So they converted them to
ZiG.
They made them tradable. So they're no longer not negotiable. And I had a client who wanted to offload some of those, and I made a few calls in the market. And nobody wants to touch those things. Everybody thinks they're worthless. Because can you imagine, like, if it was you, right? Having an instrument on your balance sheet, a local currency instrument that matures in 2027. How will you discount it?
And the currency has already lost 44% of its value.
This thing is not worth the paper it's printed on.
So that's one loser. Who else is a loser?
So anybody
who
who has to interact or interface with ZiG is losing. And what we're going to see happen is that the market share of the local currency is going to continue to shrink, because at some point people are just going to get to a place where the losses are just so untenable where when you transact in local currency that you actually don't want to touch it. You're just going to say, you know what? If you want to pay me in local currency, I'm not doing business with you.
Right. Okay, and biggest winner?
There are no winners here. We're all getting poorer.
Government is a winner.
No. I actually don't think that the government is a winner in this instance, because what you're seeing happening is we're destroying economic value at a national level, and the government.
No, but in the narrowest of definition, where we just look at the policy, the government had a budget deficit of around 13%, and overnight that budget deficit is halved. Now they can claim.
Has it halved though?
What we're saying is by the end of the year, they can actually claim that they were well within their means in terms of expenditure, that they met the budget deficit targets, and never mind what happened in between.
No. I look at it differently. I think that you can't hide the nature of your expenses, with local currency, and you can't hide GDP headwinds by printing. So if everybody in the market is getting poorer, it means the state is collecting less in taxes.
You're looking at the indirect impact of this. I'm just saying that they had borrowed from the central bank $100 worth of ZiG. Today, how much do they owe the central bank?
Oh no! Anybody who's borrowed ZiG is better off because.
And who's the largest borrower in this market?
But ZiG is only 20% on a good day.
I said, who's the largest borrower?
It's government, of course.
So they are a winner.
So I think both your arguments, as far as I'm seeing them, they are valid. you are looking at it on a net basis on this particular action, on particular transaction, that when you're looking at maybe the cash flow position, there's someone who has got a net positive cash flow, as it were. In then there's another one who has got
The depositor has lost money.
has lost money. But where Rufaro is also coming from is when you look at it at a global sort of a view, and you're looking at the balance sheet now, not just cash flow. The government can be a net winner in a scenario where more businesses are closing shop. The rate of unemployment is growing. I mean, the confidence in the both the fiscal and the monetary regime is actually warning. So at the end of the day, they're actually also a loser in a long-term kind of basis. So I don't think they'll sit there and say, this was fantastic. This is how much gain that we've made. Yet we know that it's a zero-sum game, right? So if you are losing maybe by way of inflation, or the exchange rate is actually reducing on balance sheet, there must be someone who is...
the reason why I say this is because we know the nature of our country, and we know the nature of the beast, especially the state, is that there will be a lot of blame apportioning that happens. And it's part of the discourse, right? Because we must actually say, okay, and Treasury is going to come to the end of the year, and they're going to say, look, we said we would have a budget deficit of 1%. And that's exactly what we did. We are spending what we're getting. So we're not printing. We're not the problem. The problem is with the central bank. And now the central bank is going to look at it and say, okay, that's fair and fine. But where was this money coming from? You guys had a budget deficit and you had an overdraft, which is very legal. Remember, in Zimbabwe, it's very legal for the central bank to actually advance money to government. So yes, we gave you that money, but that overdraft was primarily because of your expenditure. So you are right as far as the global. Both of you are right as far as the global. And if we looked at the beast that way, that we say, okay, who's the net? Who benefits the most and who loses? Everyone loses. Devaluation, everybody loses. The exporter is losing, the importer is losing, government is losing, everybody. It's a net loss for everybody. But if we're to go forward, we need to be very honest about what the incentives are and what the perverse incentives are. And I can kid you not that the devaluation has created a perverse incentive for Treasury, because they know that another devaluation is going to come. So they will spend, knowing that there will be a devaluation, and that devaluation will then cancel out the debt. That's what I'm mindful of. But anyway, let's hear from the audience as well. Let's hear what you guys think. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe Ranga and Rufaro are wrong. But, we will benefit from the discourse and what you guys think. So please, in the comment section, please write. But Rufaro, let's now get to the weeds of the actual MPS statement, as usual. And I know what you're going to say. So they had 3 paragraphs where they're really talking about stability and how everything is going swimmingly well. And hunky-dory.
We're talking about it snowing.
True. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with the words that they use to just describe how inflation is stable, and we are actually increasing the foreign currency inflows in the 8 months to August 2024. But what I want to focus on the 4 key items that they put out as resolutions. And the first resolution was to increase the bank policy rate from 20% to 35% with immediate effect. So in the earlier statement, they tell us that inflation is under control, but immediately they tell us that they want to control bank credit, and they're increasing, it's almost double. What are your thoughts on that, the bank policy rate?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's. I think you captured it quite well when you spoke to, so there's all this great stability, everything is hunky dory, but we've got this very aggressive ratcheting up of interest rates. The two. How do you reconcile the two? How does that make any sense? And sadly, A part of me thinks that this is just a storm in a teacup, because what we're seeing increasingly happening in our economy is the formal sector is losing market share to the informal sector, and the banking sector is, in real terms, is shrinking as people lose faith and confidence in the local currency, and are concerned about how policy might affect their hard currency balances. So, is it relevant? Is it going to move the needle? Is it going to change anything?
Well, they'll argue it's tightening of the monetary policy.
I think it's just going to give bankers migraines, but for the average citizen,
they're not choosing the bank anyway. So would you say it's the same again on the second item, which was to increase and standardize statutory reserves requirements, which have actually increased in both local and foreign currency deposits, to 30%. So they've increased them from 15% and 20%. So local deposit, the statutory reserve was 15%, and then foreign currency deposit statutory reserves were 20%, and they've increased this to 30%, which is again a tightening of the monetary system.
So on one end, they actually loosening the monetary and the fiscal side by just spending willy-nilly unbudgeted for. So they're the ones that are increasing the liquidity on the market. And on the other hand, they believe the best way for neutralizing the liquidity that they have injected into the system is to take it away in form of statutory reserve, to make it difficult for
bank lending. So they're actually punishing private sector.
They're actually punishing private sector. There's nothing wrong with that. If you are punishing private sector for their ills, for their misdeeds, but you can't punish private sector for the treasury and central bank's misdeeds. So if we continue on that path, it means we won't be able to solve the problem, because as far as they are concerned, the problem is the private sector. Yet the private sector is not making any contribution in the growth in the liquidity situation. They are actually a victim of that. We want to get to a stage where they acknowledge that they are the source of the liquidity that ends up causing havoc in terms of inflationary pressures and also the exchange rate movement. When they do that, then it would sort of prompt them or make them sort of manage the situation, because they have correctly identified the source. But they're choosing to just ignore the source of the liquidity, and they're punishing. It's like being
the guy who actually needs that liquidity.
It's like being a parent. You come back, you are drunk, you made some very bad decision, you start beating up your kid for that. It's a poor behavior.
I don't know about that example, but Rufaro, do you think that that's a good case that Ranga is making? That when you think about it, yes, it's good in light of maybe not in light of foreign currency. If it was real, then why would you increase the statutory reserves? But for the local currency, it's a good policy, but it's punishing the guy who has nothing to do with the problem.
Yeah, look, and if you actually look at how we've managed liquidity, over the last 20 years, this is a toolkit that we are all too familiar with. This is how the central bank has behaved time and again. They create liquidity, and then they sweep it out of the system with these NNCDs. They want to have their cake and eat it. It doesn't work, but we see this kind of policy action again and again and again, and that's what I find particularly disappointing, because we've done this many, many times. We have not achieved the desired outcomes, and yet we return to those same policy actions. It boggles my mind.
Okay, so in light of that, Ranga, The third item is to allow greater exchange rate flexibility, which is something that we've already talked about, in line with increased demand for foreign currency in the economy. So maybe they're now talking about the exchange rate and being flexible with the exchange rate, but then they don't define it. But I think we've already spent enough time with as far as the exchange rate is concerned.
The bankers should be the ones telling us that, you know what, we've been empowered to discover the exchange
True
rate.
price. Yeah.
Yes, just call us, tell us, give us your bids, and we will execute. It's by actually setting an arbitrary exchange rate at 25. What the central bank is telling us is that this is a managed exchange rate, and somebody in an ivory tower is going to tell us what the official rate is.
Okay. And then it says reduce the amount of foreign currency an individual can take out of the country from 10,000 to 2,000. What's informing that policy?
So someone believes that we are taking more money out of this country, and that's the reason why we have got a shortage of foreign currency, and probably why the rate is
moving.
Is moving. But I mean,
I don't think so. I think that, and I want Chess to speak to this because I think it's giving us a clue on what they think is happening as far as Nostro is concerned, because they think that there are individuals who are continuously
money out.
taking money from Nostro and shipping it out, and if they were doing it at a rate of $10,000 a day, is it a month or?
No, it's per trip, right? I think 10,000
per trip.
Yeah.
Okay. It means that Nostro, could this potentially be a clue on what's actually happening in Nostro?
No, I don't think there's any new information there apart from what it tells us about the mindset. There's this siege mentality. There's this idea, and we hear it over and over again. And it's not new. It's not peculiar to this particular governor. We've heard this kind of language and narrative for the last 20 years, which is that there are bad actors out there, right? There are people who are shipping out this money, and so we need to be mindful about this. We need to control it. We need to make it harder. So let's reduce the amount from 10,000 to 2,000. And it's a false narrative. The reason why we have all these challenges is not because people are shipping money out. The reason why we have these challenges is because there isn't faith and confidence
in the system.
Yeah, and the institutions that are supposed to engender faith and confidence have behaved in a manner that has destroyed their credibility. And so if I have $1, I'm more likely to keep it in the National Mattress Bank than a licensed bank.
Let's hear from Ranga. What do you think? So Rufaro thinks it's not an event, but I think it's a keen clue on what's actually happening with Nostro. Although I agree with Rufaro that blaming individuals is probably not the right thing to do, but it's telling us that there's something that's happening in our Nostro, that the cash within the Nostro system is depleting. What do you think? Do you think that Rufaro is right or I'm right?
I think the issue of the Nostro has always been there. Because of our past experiences. Remember, we used to have FCA accounts.
Yes.
And then they ended up...
Well, they're now all called FCA accounts. Nostro is old language. We've changed. We've switched up the nomenclature.
So we had FCA accounts, and at some point we started having local FCA accounts.
Yes.
And then FCA accounts. So, and what we experienced then was the depreciation of value, or the devaluation of that FCA account or Nostro, from being 1-to-1 with the raw USD note or Nostro or any bank account outside the country. So that has always been an issue. I don't think there's any one serious economic player who believes that the Nostro is exactly 1-to-1. That's why even when you're transacting Nostro, it's never 1-to-1. There's always a discount or a premium depending on which side of the equation you are sitting on. So, and yet when you look at it, I think for most individuals, they don't keep money in Nostro. So if your some credit balance hit your Nostro, next day you're going to a bank, you're withdrawing the money. What you do with it, I don't know. But I don't think most people are withdrawing and taking the money outside the country. There are not too many people who are in that position to be able to take huge sums of money.
Well, if we go with the numbers as far as June was concerned, notes and coins notes and coins plus foreign notes and coins plus balances held offshore were 820 million, and this had come down a year before. It was about 1.2. So about 400 million had left our Nostro. But on the other side,
So maybe it left the
total
Nostro
deposits.
and it's going into
National Mattress Bank.
Yes.
Yeah. But then, as far as total deposits are concerned, these are actually increasing. So this is the latest numbers that we have. It's about $2.5 billion. So the system is
a lot of the gap is just normal bank credit creation.
But we're saying the gap is actually increasing.
It's growing. Yeah. Look.
Right. So I'm taking this as a cue on government worried, or the central bank worried about the gap. That's all I'm saying. That actually this gives us a clue that they are worried.
Well, if they're worried about
that these balances keep depleting.
If they're worried about the gap, and you're correct, they're spooking people who think like you. They're actually not making the problem better.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. That they for me, it's spooky.
I mean,
it's very spooky.
But look, I sadly I think we're just in a place where the local currency is going to lose market share, and the formal banking sector is losing market share to the informal sector and the National Mattress Bank. And actually, I find it quite remarkable that the retailers have the gumption to actually speak out and say, you know what, guys, there's a problem.
Okay.
And the bankers are quiet, right?
That's very interesting. Yeah,
because
expand on that?
because the bankers are at the epicenter of these challenges, right? As they're the biggest loser as the formal sector loses market share to the informal sector. As we continue to erode faith and confidence in our local currency and institutions, the banks are the biggest loser. Right, because people are less likely to keep their money in a bank. They're much more likely to keep their money in the National Mattress Bank. So the banks are going to earn less in fees and commissions. And as these interest rates go up, and you have all this tightening, the bank's capacity to actually to write loans and earn interest income is also shrinking. So it's really an attack on the formal banking sector, and the bankers are quiet.
Maybe the banks are losing, but the bankers are certainly not losing. In times like that,
say that slowly for some of us to catch it. What are you trying to say, Ranga?
So I think the level of pain that a retailer feels is totally different from what bankers actually feel in these circumstances. Because if you're a retailer and your stock is being depleted and you're selling your merchandise at a loss, you would feel it immediately as a business owner, but also as an employee of the organization. For banks, banks basically keep client balances. So the deposit is not the bank's money; it's a depositor's money. And fine, the loan is an asset on their balance sheet, but still, is something. So they're basically matching the deposit they're getting.
It's matched.
It's matched. So, and they're getting their cut either way. And for the bankers, look, they're human beings. You can't falter them. But I mean, we are talking about how people take advantage of arbitrage opportunities in the currency. I wouldn't put it past them to be, you write loans to yourself, and then within a month, the loans they just disappear.
Disappear.
Yeah. So at a personal level, because if bankers were really feeling the pain personally,
They
I
would
think
also write
they-
a love letter.
Exactly. But I mean, imagine you're a banker, you get a loan for 1 million ZiG in January at a rate of 13. Today is 25. Have you lost? Are you a net loser? Or
You've gained. And you've actually created a perverse incentive for me to even go harder next
exactly.
time. To
Exactly.
even borrow it as much as I possibly
Exactly.
can.
And they always have an excuse to their client. You know what? It's not our problem.
So do you
It's a
think
policy
that interest
environment.
rates are eventually going to be hiked back? Because now it's fiat currency. That we'll get back to high interest rates of around 100%.
It's possible. So what we are learning from what has happened this week is whenever central bank feels that there's more and more liquidity that is coming in, and the market players are bound to take advantage of arbitrage opportunities by borrowing in a weak ZiG, knowing that in 2-3 months down the line, inflation would have taken care of that borrowing. Then it creates an incentive for more borrowing. So as far as the central bank is concerned, the only way for that to be managed is to be hiking the rate again. But you would want to ask yourself, how many people out there are borrowing? How many businesses out there are borrowing in ZiG? Because if you borrow in ZiG, what are you going to do with it? Already, businesses that are selling their merchandise in ZiG are sitting on huge.
Well,
balances.
you borrow in ZiG and you hold US dollars and you just wait for another devaluation.
But you already, for a typical business, they already have got huge balances of ZiG from their sales, which they can't convert into USD.
Fair point. Very fair
see.
point.
So-
what do you think?
Oh, I think ZiG is dying. I think eventually the issuer is molesting the currency so much that we're going to wake up one day and nobody wants to touch it.
Because I mean, officially losing 44% of its value.
And that rate is arbitrary and it's not a real rate. I mean, the
So
rate
it's
is it's not of,
potentially
it's not
more.
of 30, and
and that will feed into inflation,
Absolutely.
into
I
inflation expectations.
see, part of the challenge here is that we're not having an honest conversation.
Well, I believe that here we are.
Okay. Well. So when I say so the conversation between
No, I get you.
the central bank and the market, right? We're told it's a free market rate. We know it's not a free market rate. We're told there's no printing going on. We know there's printing going on. So it's a cat and mouse game, and so but unlike 2008, where for most Zimbabweans we were experiencing hyperinflation for the first time, and we were experiencing these epic exchange rate losses for the first time. Today, everybody's alive to, we had this 2008, 2009, and then 2016, 2017. So everybody's alive. We've seen this movie a bunch of times. We know the writing is on the wall. We know how it's going to end. We know to avoid this local currency like the plague. We know not to save in the formal banking sector. If there isn't a change or improvement in behavior, I suspect that by January, February, no one will want to touch this local currency.
Well, on that said note, thank you very much for joining us. I thought this was useful for just catching up with the new MPS and the new change in exchange rate. We are not really sure what's going to happen, but I think that Rufaro has made a pronouncement. He thinks it will be gone. It will be buried very soon. And then we start again with another new currency, I would assume.
Well, I don't know. I mean, but if history is a guide, then I don't know. We'll
You know what they say about
we'll
history.
probably replace the silent G with another letter.
Have yourself a great week. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Cheers.